Hello there, lovely listeners. My name's Ben Yenny, and this is the very first episode of the Movie Moolah Podcast. Today, we are talking about making money with your documentary with Josh Davidsburg. Now, he is also an Emmy winner. Why don't I mention that when I'm talking to him in the podcast itself? Because he won the Emmy after we recorded. But before we're releasing, there is a lag time. Not much of one, but there's one. So, big congrats to Josh Davidsburg, and a big welcome to all of you listening at home. Hello and welcome to the Movie Moolah Podcast. My name is Ben Yenny, and I am your hopefully lovely host. The Movie Moolah Podcast is a place where serious people come to talk about serious topics in often silly conversations about the very strange industry in which we find ourselves. With me today is Josh Davidsburg. He is best known, probably, as the director of Queen of the Capitol, as well as many other things. Josh.
Ben, thanks for having me. This is great.
Anything else you want to add before we get into more conversation about documentaries and movies in general?
Yeah, I mean, so I also teach documentary and broadcast journalism at the Philip Merrill College of Journalism. That's my kind of full-time job. Documentary production is my other full-time job / side hustle kind of thing. It's my passion project. It's what I love to do. And, teaching gives me the opportunity both to teach students how to do it and to go out and do it as well. So I teach documentary and journalism, and now I get to do documentary as well.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's like, you've made the work of yours that I've seen, which I, full transparency, helped distribute and represented your first movie, Queen of the Capitol, and it's quite good. You have an eye for story, which is kind of important for documentaries.
Thank you. I was a TV reporter for about 7 years, and I always kind of focused on the storytelling aspect of it. Journalism first, and then the storytelling aspect second. And you spend your time writing stories that are a minute 15 in length, right? And if you can get good at writing a story with a beginning, middle, and end in a minute 15, that really helped me with full feature-length documentaries because, my rough cut wasn't 3 or 4 hours the way that some people's rough cut was. My rough cut was closer to what we ended up. It wasn't exactly, we still ended up cutting 20 minutes out of it. But, I think just spending so much time writing concisely and making concise stories helped me when I started to do longer form stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true. There's a reason that if you go to film school, one of the earliest exercises they have you do is make a short, like a 3-minute short, and then they have you cut that same short down to 1 minute. And it racks a lot of people's brains, but it's an incredibly valuable exercise.
Shorts are a lot harder. They really are. Just trying to figure out what you can cram in with still letting it breathe at the same time. That's an excellent exercise. I might have to steal that one for my classes.
Well, I am glad that I have assisted in your students' pain. But the pain and gain. But so yeah, what made you want to make Queen of the Capitol specifically as your first documentary?
So I've always wanted to make a documentary ever since I saw the movie Spellbound, the documentary Spellbound in like the early 2000s. They were selling it at the campus bookstore, and I bought it on VHS. And that was the first documentary that showed me like documentaries could be character driven. So that's kind of one thing that I look at when I'm looking for a documentary story idea. So the way that Queen of the Capitol happened is I used to teach this class called Intro to Multimedia, where my students basically had to do a doc short at the end of the class. This was over summer session, and one of my students went to Pride and found this drag queen with huge hair and went up to her and said, "I want to do a story on you." And she did, and it was one of the best pieces I've still ever gotten in teaching. And then I was talking to those students after class one day, and they asked me what I wanted to do with my career besides just teach. And I said, well, I always wanted to make documentaries. And Brandy said, well, why don't we make one on Muffy? And she set up a meeting. We met at the campus bar and hung out with Muffy for a little bit. And Muffy told us all about the amazing things that she does for the Imperial Court and for just drag in DC in general, and the fact that she works for the government when she's not in drag. And I thought, this is the documentary that I have to do. Just meeting Muffy really was what kind of, because I had not been to, really, I hadn't been to like real drag shows before that. I hadn't really been involved in the community like that. And this kind of opened my eyes and was a door in. And really, it was the amazing stuff that Muffy does for the community that kind of drew me in. And I didn't want to just do a documentary about drag queens. There's something special about Muffy, which I'm sure we'll get into.
There is something special about Muffy. That's true. I have not had the pleasure of meeting her, but I have spoken with her many times on Zoom and things. And she is quite a trip to talk to, really.
We got to change that. We got to get you down to DC to
I know.
We'll go to a drag brunch or something.
Actually, weirdly, I guess behind the curtain, I spent a lot of time in several different San Francisco gay bars, with one being the one I spent the most time in. They named a drink after me, which I take as a huge honor or a huge condemnation, because I am a cishet white dude and I got a drink named after me in a gay bar, so I must have drank there too much.
I guess it depends on what kind of drink, right?
Yes. It was very tasty. But anyway, I randomly saw her post on Facebook that she was there for a drag meetup, and I was able to get the owner, because I was still friends with him on Facebook, to comp her a drink.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's
awesome. Small world.
It always is.
Yes.
But yeah. So I think lost my train of thought. Sorry.
That's okay.
So once you made the documentary, because this actually, before we get there, what are a couple of things that you personally learned that you wish you had known at the start by the time you were done just with the production process? Like one or two. I know we could be here all day.
Yeah, no, I teach a whole college class on this basically. Well, first, since this podcast is kind of about money and movies, I wish I'd started fundraising earlier. I wish I just kind of jumped right in and started doing it. Fundraising is hard, and you have to, with documentaries, you have to do a lot of it on your own. Just go out and start shooting and start doing it. But you don't want to wait too long before you start writing grants and approaching people for money. And with Queen of the Capitol, I think we probably waited a little too long before we started raising money. Probably could have gotten more in earlier to kind of, make things a little easier. So that would be my number one. The one that I tell everybody that I talk about a lot is I wish I had gotten to know more about fair use before I started filming. So fair use, and let me preface this by saying I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. First thing you need to do is talk to a lawyer whenever you start filming a documentary, because you're going to have questions come up from the beginning, and you want to have a lawyer there that will answer all those questions for you. And lawyers actually, for a lot of documentaries, will even do it pro bono if you find the right lawyer. Like, we've had a great lawyer who has done 3 of our documentaries. He signed on to 3 of our documentaries pro bono, hasn't taken a cent from us. So, there's a lot of tools out there to get legal advice for documentary filmmakers. Back to fair use. So what fair use is it's an exception in copyright that says that if it's educational or if it's journalistic, if it's not a kind of money-making endeavor, then there's an opportunity to use copyrighted material in your piece to demonstrate a point, basically. There are 4 kind of caveats that you have to hit to be, to fall under fair use. Fair use also is just a legal, it's a legal device. It's not going to save you from getting sued, but it'll help you win a lawsuit, basically. So fair use mixed with errors and omissions insurance, like that's the tools that you're going to need to basically claim fair use. So the reason that this is so important with my documentary is drag queens lip sync, right? So all that music is copyrighted. So going into it, my first thought was, I'm going to have to cut all this music out or raise a ton of money to license all this music. And that is not necessarily the case. So fair use says, because it's happening naturally, because I can't tell their story without showing them lip syncing to this song, in certain cases, I can use that music. I can't cut to it. I can't edit to the beats of that music because then it starts to become a sync track. But I can use them lip syncing to a particular song as much as I need. I can't use more than I need, but as much as I need to prove my point, right? So with that in mind, if I'd kind of known that going in, I might have shot some of the performances differently. I shot them to edit a montage over other music, where I could have shot them almost as a performance and maybe used a little more, and it would have given it a slightly different feel and maybe brought you to some of the more of the performances a little more. Whether or not, hindsight is all 2020. But I wish I'd known a little more about fair use before I had started filming.
That's really good, not legal advice.
Right.
There's a reason that my blog and my videos actually have a separate tag for not legal advice. But I am also not a lawyer.
Right.
But I would have a question of more from a sales perspective than anything. I'd imagine certain performers would be willing to grant a license for significantly below market value for something like this, especially
Right.
given what's going on.
And you can always ask, and even if they
Yeah.
say no, you can still claim fair use.
Mm-hmm.
So it never hurts to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the key is to talk to a lawyer before you shoot, and then if you don't talk to a lawyer before you shoot, after you shoot, you're going to have to anyway, because the lawyer is going to have to sign off on all that fair use for E&O insurance. So once you have E&O insurance, you should be good. But the key is getting a lawyer who approves what you're using for E&O insurance.
Yeah, we've had E&O actually will be a giant pain in your butt no matter what sort of film you're making. It's worse for documentaries, but it's bad in general. I actually, by the time this drops, I should have just released a blog where one of the biggest things I learned about running a distribution company was exactly how much time I spent on insurance.
I'm
That
sure.
was a little. I expected to have to do it as the CEO there, but I didn't expect it to be more than 10% of my time, which
I'm sure.
specifically,
Right. It is.
yeah.
For documentary filmmakers, E&O insurance and music licensing are like the 2 biggest costs that you don't really think about, right? They're the 2 things that, going into it, I didn't really know how much E&O insurance or music would cost, and it's something you need to know from the beginning to really budget.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things that they might hopefully now teach you in journalism school, but
They do in my class.
but in general they don't teach in film school about exactly how much time and money you're going to have to spend on insurance, and you can't just skip it. It's like legal, it's way more expensive if you don't get it. It's the so yeah, that was really good. That was moving forward from that. What did you know about distribution going into making your first documentary?
So I would say I come from a storytelling background. I come from journalism, and distribution was not anything I'd ever had to deal with before. I would say I knew absolutely nothing about distribution besides, like, I like to go to movies and watch movies in movie theaters, and that was pretty much it. And I thought I would finish the documentary and it would get into Sundance, and that would be it, right? Like, I wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. Um, Luckily, I got a great producer's rep who walked us through the whole thing. I don't know who that could be.
Yeah, no idea.
But yeah, I mean, we really lucked out with our distribution. We got you. I don't mean to like blow smoke up your ass, but we got you as our producer's rep, and then getting into Mutiny at the very beginning and being the first film that you all picked up and ended up on all of your press as well. And then our film festival run, definitely learned some lessons there. The number one lesson I learned in my film festival run. So you'll read some blogs that will say, if you're entering Sundance, enter it, get it in there. It doesn't matter if it's done, as long as you have a producer's cut, as long as it's like good and producer's cut, enter it. And so I entered it in all those film festivals in the fall. I entered it in the fall for the spring, right? Starting with Sundance and like a bunch of film festivals. We still had, it was pretty much edited. Audio wasn't mixed. It wasn't colored. And music still had watermarks on it. We hadn't hired a composer to, they were all temp tracks still. So we basically got rejected from every film festival we applied to for like 9 months until we had the final cut. And the second we had the final cut, we started getting into film festivals and like started our festival run. But it's really dejecting to enter in, to get rejected from that many film festivals. And really, like, what you need to do is have that, unless you're already in the Sundance system and they're expecting your documentary, do not enter a early cut to anything, really, because you're wasting your money, basically.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about these higher tier places is they just get such a gigantic influx of submissions that it has to go through a 2-tier system. There has to go through a first round of review, and that person from the first round of review, pretty much their job is to look for a reason to say no, because they need to cull 90% of what they watch. And then that remaining 10% actually gets watched by a programmer. And that's where, and those are the ones that actually have a shot at getting in, really. This is personal experience. This is and unofficial information, so it might be wrong. Who knows? I'm some dude on the internet. But in general, you don't have much of a shot at getting into these major guys. I'm not going to name anybody in particular, but it's true for probably the top 10 world, at least. If you're not actually talking to a programmer, you've got a very slim chance of getting in. And that's it's just the reality you have to face yourself with. However, my understanding of one festival in particular that comes from actually somebody in this call is that they do things very differently.
Right.
Can you talk about the number one film, like the biggest, most notable film fest you got into?
So, we entered a bunch, started getting in the fall, we actually premiered at our film festival premiere was a small film festival on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, right? But we started getting into bigger and bigger film festivals. At the end of the year, we got into the Virginia Film Festival, which is a nice regional film festival. And I thought our festival run was done. We'd end with like a nice medium sized. And then we got an email from Slam Dance, which I had kind of just applied on a whim, figuring we'd already premiered. It wouldn't get in, but we got in. They don't care if it's a premiere as long as it's still new. They love the documentary, and it actually meant just as much getting into Slam Dance as any other top tier film festival, because they are programmed by former Slam Dance filmmakers. So everybody who watches their movies and culls them and approves what's going to go in, they're all people who have screened at Slam Dance before. So it's a filmmakers film festival by filmmakers. It was the most supportive group of people I've ever met when it comes to filmmaking. All the other film festivals were great, but it wasn't like this nurturing kind of community where, I still talk to the people that I met at Slam Dance. One of the other films at Slam Dance, actually, one that screened right before mine, the filmmaker lives like 15 minutes away from me. And we've hung out a few times, and I'm helping him on another documentary that he's doing now. And there's a bunch of success stories like that from Slam Dance, where filmmakers have met each other and they go on to make magic.
Awesome. See, that's I after hearing that the first time, I really started to like Slam Dance a lot more. I do. The high tier film fests are a lot more insular, and also weirdly sometimes the low tier film fests.
Yes.
Like there's a term from academia that I understand, which is that which I understand to be true, and I apply to especially regional and small film festivals, which is the vitriol and nepotism is so high because the stakes are so low.
Right.
And it's just the probably gonna get in trouble for that one. But
no, yeah.
Go ahead.
A lot of those small film festivals just want big name films from Sundance, and one of the film festivals that we applied to where we knew people, we didn't get into because part of it was we were still using our producer's cut, but the other reason is they really wanted films that at the time, were big on the film festival circuit, and they already had a film that had drag performers, or about drag performers, even though like we were local, but it is what it is.
It's I am. So festivals are still important for your marketing run, especially if you have a shot at getting into any of the big ones. There's a different strategy if you don't, that can be used in conjunction with your distribution run. More about developing audience awareness and early stage press. But beyond that, it's not, more than likely your festival run will not result in a distribution deal for you, especially for documentaries.
Can I add something to that?
Go ahead.
And if you're not working at marketing your movie while you're at those festivals, it's not going to do anything for you. I love film festivals. I think they are like great for filmmakers. They're great for audiences. Our goal as filmmakers is to have people see our films, and what a better way. You're probably not going to get a big festival run or not a big theater run from distribution, right? You're probably the only time that a bunch of people will see your movie is at festivals in the theater. But you have to keep marketing your movie at the festivals, because you're just going to end up a blurb in their program if you're not also marketing it on top of that. I can't tell you how many times I saw other movies at these festivals, and there was nobody in the theater, maybe like 2 or 3 people. And, that's depressing for the filmmaker. Really what they should have been doing is promoting their movie and trying to get people to come throughout. I didn't really learn this until Slam Dance. That's another great thing about Slam Dance. They give you this big packet of information about what you're supposed to do to like market your movie at Park City. So you know, you have to be out there. If you can put up posters, put up posters. You know, our movie was about a drag queen, so she was there handing out flyers and other stuff. We gave out these condoms that said "Get Lucky with Muffy" that were from the documentary. You know, and that just gets people into the theater, and it's your job as a filmmaker when you get into these film festivals to put those butts in the seats and to make sure people are watching and talking about your movie. Go to the parties, talk to your
Oh,
movie
yeah.
to people at the parties.
No, that makes sense. You'll get a lot more people out if you actually show up to things like that. There's a similar dynamic at film markets when you're actually trying to network and get buyers to a screening, because most of the time they don't care. Frankly, you might be able to get a lot of festival programmers out, but even then, the big ones don't care enough to use their market time sitting in a screen watching your movie. But that whole thing of giving something memorable and tangible to people, like a condom that says "Get Lucky with Muffy," that's still pretty much my go-to example on this. But because it's not perishable either. Well, I mean it is, but not in the same. But I don't
Right.
think anybody's actually using it.
I don't want to know. After it leaves my hands, it's up to them. Yeah.
Fair enough. But no, it's having something like that, something tangible, will really help people remember you. And that's what really this festival stage is about. Gaining awareness and helping people remember you for when they see it later. Because even if they saw it before, or even if they couldn't make the screening but they met you, they're a lot more likely to hit that buy button or even just hit that watch button, which brings us to an interesting point. At least in my opinion, any good distributor who's going to work with smaller films, the only way that we can make it financially viable for ourselves, or at least for the country of origin, in this case the US, wherever it was shot, you need to partner with the filmmaker to get the word out there, because it kind of creates an echo chamber. That's the only chance you really have at creating an echo chamber that's loud enough to really rise above the white noise of selling a movie. And the distributor should have really good press, and the filmmaker should have a deep understanding of who their audience is and how they're going to get it out there. And together, the two of us can really help bring your film to a higher cultural awareness. And that's about the only way you're ever going to be able to make any significant amount of money with it, because it's hard to get people to watch narrative movies and pay for them.
Right.
It's nearly impossible for documentaries. Is there anything you learned about that you'd like to share?
I mean, that is completely true. I mean, everybody is so used to getting their documentaries on Netflix and, you know, Amazon Prime. They're not used to paying for it. It's just like with film festivals. You just have to get out there and keep on doing your own marketing in addition to whatever marketing hopefully your distributor is doing. You know, a lot of filmmakers think that once they get picked up by their distributor, their work is done, but it isn't. We did have a little bit of a big national crisis when we went into distribution that kind of made things a little more difficult for some of our plans. You know, COVID hit and we all went on lockdown, and any impact plan that we had. So that's another thing as a documentary filmmaker you want to think about. It does two things. An impact plan will do good for the world, right? It's your impact on the world, but it's also a marketing tool too. So, you know, our plan was to use the court system, which is this group that Muffy is a part of across the US, 70 different chapters, and have them do screenings, and they could use it as a fundraiser. And but then COVID hit, and it kind of like killed our momentum a little bit on the impact plan. But that's something you want to think about. So as a filmmaker, you still have to think about the marketing and how are you going to cut through the noise, because there is a lot of noise out there. Really, the distributor, in my view, unless you are, something as big as like Boys State or one of the big like
Mm-hmm.
Sundance movies that gets picked up, the distributor is kind of like the avenue to like the highways to get to your audience. You still have to pay for the billboards and like figure out how to get the billboards in front of people, right? Hopefully you'll have a distributor that will help with that kind of thing. I mean, Mutiny, like we both worked on press a lot and we got really good press together with this. Coming from local news and teaching journalism, I kind of have a network of reporters that either I worked with or were my students that are kind of out in the field that I could either pitch to or they could give me the right reporter to pitch to. So we ended up on KTLA. We ended up Ms. Magazine was like a really big hit that you all got. We had a bunch of local stories in Baltimore, DC, Norfolk, Virginia. And that's just really like hitting the ground and pitching these stations, like figuring out what's a good news hook for them because they're still doing news and journalism. So maybe like if your documentary is about drag queens during Pride, that's when you pitch them on a new documentary coming out about local drag queens that screened at Slamdance and being picked up and is on Amazon Prime now, or is on Alamo Drafthouse, right?
Yeah, it was Drafthouse at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, part of it is figuring out, part of getting press is figuring out what's actually newsworthy and as well as what the proclivities of the editor you're pitching to are. So like I think part of the reason we were able to get as much trade pickup for Queen as we did is it was also Mutiny's launch announcement. So we were able to get all of the majors except I don't think we got Hollywood Reporter, but we got everywhere else. We got The Wrap, we got Deadline, we got Variety, we got all of that, and that's a really good spread for a documentary. But part of it was that known industry players have started a new company too with this as their lead. So it was a bigger story, and part of it is figuring out how best to package that bigger story so that you can get the widest availability, the widest coverage of it possible, basically.
It's the same with local journalism and local news outlets, slightly different because they are a little more news bent. So I found documentary was a lot easier to pitch to them because you're doing a story. You're basically, so documentary filmmakers, whether you like it or not, we are doing stories about the truth. I tend to think of ourselves for the most part as journalists. I know a lot of documentary filmmakers don't. There's a big discussion about that, but a lot of our stories intersect with stuff that they are doing stories about. So you just have to find that intersection and figure out how to pitch it, how to word it, so that they'll cover it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's not just that though, because we are talking about newsworthiness. It's
Absolutely.
much easier with documentaries to find newsworthiness and newsworthy causes. You can find general themes in narrative films as well. But another thing that you just have to be really careful of, especially if you are making something more like a standard narrative, shouldn't say standard, but a film, a feature film that is fictional, is that you really need to be careful about when you drop certain assets, even like your posters, your trailers, your acquisitions announcements, all of this, because you kind of need to play a little bit of a game to figure out, can we get an exclusive on the trailer from Collider? Can we get an exclusive on the poster from Bloody Disgusting if it's a horror movie or anything like that? And it makes it just a lot more likely that you're going to be able to do something with it. And also helps on those fronts if you are dealing with a known entity in the distribution world, because people are going to pay a lot more attention, basically.
And it's interesting when you're talking about those assets and everything, because with documentary, a lot of times you have to be a lot more open from the very beginning because you need all of those assets to start fundraising. You're going to start talking about your documentary from the second you get your sources to sign exclusivity clauses, right? Where, from what I've heard on the narrative side, you have to be a lot more careful about when you start pitching or who you pitch to, because you don't want people to steal those ideas. So there's a real give and take there with documentary, because you need to get that word out there. As soon as you're not raising money from the same sources that the narrative side is, you're raising money from organizations that offer grants or like donations, right? We don't for the most part, we don't get investments in documentary. We get donations. So it's a whole different ball game when it comes to raising money and those assets. You just got to get them out as soon as possible.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree. And then when it comes down to press or on launch to actually get some money back for the product, you have to be more reliant on the newsworthiness of the topic in general, because it feels more like news, as you mentioned, Josh. So it's just there are a lot of similarities, because we are in essence selling limited use licenses to something that is infinitely replicable, depending on what exact license you're looking for. It can be anywhere for one person for one viewing for 3 days, or an entire country for all rights for 10 years. It really just does come down to a game of licensing. And the big thing is just figuring out exactly what tactics are going to best serve you in either getting the word out about it, whether getting the word out about it is to spread a message or to sell tickets. And it's just, how do you achieve that goal? And with documentaries, especially since you don't generally have money to pay back like you do with a narrative feature film, you are more free to utilize those in order to raise that money that you now don't have to pay back.
So one thing I found that people kind of outside of the documentary world, or people entering the documentary world, don't really know about or understand is, one thing you need to look for is it's called a fiscal sponsor. It is a 501c3 that will act as kind of an umbrella organization so that you can raise donations, right? So somebody can't just write you, I mean, I guess they could just write you a check and donate it to you. But if they want to write it off on their taxes, it needs to go to a nonprofit. And so there are these organizations out there that focus on documentaries. They are called fiscal sponsors. And you get partnered up with one of them, and somebody will write a check to, IDA, the Independent Documentary Association, or International Documentary Association. They'll take, 5%, and then that money goes to you. But the person that wrote the check can write it off on their taxes. It is legally considered a donation. So that's one thing when you start raising money for your documentary, you need to look for. Probably the first thing, because there are some grant organizations that will not give you money if you don't have a fiscal sponsor.
That's very true. And you also, whether you're making a documentary or a narrative film, you should look into a fiscal sponsorship, especially if you're trying to do a crowdfunding campaign.
Absolutely.
That's and there are generally fiscal sponsorship organizations that you can find to use as a fiscal sponsor. There are many of them, and unless you're making Human Centipede 7, I'm willing to bet you can find one. I mean, even then, maybe
that, yeah, even one thing you should think about, though, if you're going to use a fiscal sponsor for a crowdfunding campaign, the crowdfunding, there's a waterfall, just like after you get distribution. So you're going to have to pay Kickstarter like 5% of whatever you raise. Then it's going to go to your fiscal sponsor. So it's 5%, then it's plus 2% for like credit card. There's a bunch of fees, right? You're going to have to pay those fees. Then it goes to your fiscal sponsor. Your fiscal sponsor is going to take 5%, 7%, 2% if you're lucky. And then you get the money. So when you're budgeting for your crowdfunding campaign, just take that into account. You're not going to get all of the money. You're going to get a percentage of the money that you raise.
If you're doing napkin math, a good place to start is figure you'll get 80 or 85% of what you actually earn, and it's probably more like 80. And this, keep in mind, all of this money is taxable as
Right.
well, so that's a different kettle of fish that we're not really including there.
Which is actually a good benefit of a fiscal sponsor. If that money is sitting in the fiscal sponsor, then I actually don't know this for sure. If the money comes directly to you, I know that it's taxable, right? But if it goes and it's sitting in the fiscal sponsor, I'm not sure if that's considered taxable yet. If that will,
you might be able to roll it over to the next tax year,
right,
so that you can spend it, because that's kind of your goal.
Talk to a CPA.
There you go. Also, or a tax attorney. Neither of us are either of those things.
Yes. No.
But they are good questions to ask, though. Thank you, Josh.
We did get hit with a huge tax bill after our crowdfunding campaign, because we didn't spend all of the money in that year.
That's you've got to be careful about that too,
right?
On part of your timing. Yeah. Okay. So what are you working on now?
Sure. So I actually, I've got 2 feature-length documentaries that I'm working on right now. One of them is about a Baltimore ballerina who spent her whole life studying the male ballet technique, and then in her senior year of high school transitioned from male to female, and basically had to start all over again from the beginning and relearn ballet, because it's such a binary art form. You learn the male technique or you learn the female technique. And so we actually started, it was a completely different documentary. We were following a group of Baltimore boys who were studying to become professional ballet dancers. And then one of them kind of emerged as our star, and then in their senior year of high school transitioned. So we pivoted with this transition, and now we're kind of following her through college and see where she goes and ends up professionally. So that one's kind of a documentary that we've kind of spread out over a few years. We're still working on it, still going, but it's going to be some time before we finish production. And then another one, which I just started production a week ago, we're doing a documentary about a group of Baltimore journalists fighting to save journalism in a city fighting to save itself. So it's all about
a good hook.
You like that? Yeah. Hey, I impressed Ben with my log line, with my pitch. So journalism, right? The Tribune company that owns a ton of newspapers was bought out by this vampiric hedge fund called Alden, which basically sells off newspaper pieces for parts, right? This has been big national news, right? In Baltimore, a billionaire said that he wanted to buy the Baltimore Sun, which is famous newspaper in Baltimore, part of the Tribune Group. As that sale was going through, he wanted to buy it, to save journalism in Baltimore. Tribune's board said no, and so this filmmaker, or this billionaire, said, "F you, I'm going to start my own newspaper," and started the Baltimore Banner. It's nonprofit and it's backed by a billionaire, so there are a bunch of nonprofit newspapers that are kind of popping up, but none of them with this type of backing. There's no one in the world doing what the Baltimore Banner is doing right now, because of the financial backing that they have, and they're going nonprofit. So like those 2 things together, everybody's looking at this paper to see what's going to happen. So they are actually letting us in for a year to follow their reporters and their business side. And so it's kind of, there are like 2 sides to the story. It's kind of like the process of journalism in Baltimore City. And then like, how do you make a news organization work? Like, will this work? How will it work? And are they going to be around by the time we're done filming? Which I think they will, because they're funded then, but are they going to be set up for the future? Right. So they have all kinds of big investigations that they're letting us follow, and they're opening the door to all the financials and kind of letting us in all those meetings. And as you can tell, I'm really excited about this one, and excited to get started on it.
Yeah, as you should be. I guess when you told me about this the other day, I didn't realize that it was a nonprofit newspaper that was
a nonprofit
newspaper. That kind of makes a huge difference, because otherwise it's how is it really that different than, I don't know, the Washington Post?
Right.
Yeah. But that's really interesting, and I'm going to be watching to see where that goes. The
Just to put things in perspective a little more,
Mhm.
they've already hired 50 reporters from the Baltimore, like bunch from the Baltimore Sun, from all over. They're focusing on diversity, which, newsrooms traditionally are not as diverse as they should be, especially in a city of like Baltimore, where they should reflect their population a little more. It's a really cool story. I'm very excited about the direction that it's going right now. And I'm like, the access that they're giving us is just kind of blowing me away at this point.
That's great. I'm sure it helps that you are well, I would say I almost said former journalist, but I'm not sure that's true. Just a
Former
different
Baltimore full-time journalist. I still freelance, but former full-time journalist. My dad was actually a reporter in Baltimore for a long time, 20, 30 years.
Oh, wow.
He was a reporter. He worked for Network, for NBC, covered Vietnam. I'll send you some pictures.
That sounds very interesting. Yeah, so cool. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of stuff to watch, and once these are getting close to done, we'll have to have you back, just because
definitely.
Now I'm trying to ask all three my guests the three same questions to lead out every
Okay.
time. So the first one, and I'll tell you what the first one is, but you can answer it second.
Okay.
So the first one is, what are your top 3 favorite movies as it stands right this second now? And
Okay.
these are things that can change like 10 minutes from now, but like
Right.
just at this present moment, what are they?
Okay.
And while you think about that, I'll ask you the second one, which is, what if you could go back and do one thing differently in your professional life, what would it be?
Huh. Um, yeah, I don't really know if there's anything I would do differently. I mean, there's small things. We talked a little bit about uh I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty happy where I am. I'm in a good place. I did, you know, I think if you had asked me the same question like 5, maybe 10, not no, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? My dream growing up was to be a network reporter, right? Um, but things change, and I've got an amazing job teaching at Merrill College, at the University of Maryland, and I don't know, I'm really happy career wise. I don't think there's anything I would do differently.
Well, that's fantastic.
I mean, my only I would say, like, my only regret would be, I wish I'd gotten Queen of the Capitol out faster. I took a long time on post production because I was doing it all myself. But like, who knew that COVID would hit, right?
Yeah.
But what it's in the end, it was still successful, and I'm happy where it is. And yeah, I don't think there's anything I would do differently career wise.
That's a really good answer. And I'm glad to hear that you are happy enough with your career that is the answer.
Yeah.
So, yes. So back to that movie question.
Top 3 movies. Okay. So why don't I do it? Narrative movies and documentary. How about that? So
That's all good.
both. Okay. Documentary is probably easier, but okay. Goodfellas is my number 1 all-time movie. I would say Casablanca, number 2, and number 3, Anchorman. I don't know, need something funny in there. Like,
that's
something in that genre, right? Something you could watch over and over and over again. And I don't know if it's Anchorman or not, but that's the first one that popped into my head that I could watch over and over again.
Again, it can change in 10 minutes, so that's the
right. I would say the first 2 wouldn't change. That third one, need a comedy in there, a good comedy. And documentary. Okay, so number 1, Boy State. Number 2, and a lot of the documentaries that I like are are a little more modern, like than the
Mhm.
classics. So Boy State number 1, Minding the Gap number 2, and number 3, um, uh, what's it called? The Act of Killing, by Josh Oppenheimer.
Okay.
Not a fun, not a fun watch, but it was just like one of the most creative forms of storytelling. One of the first, so all 3 of these documentaries kind of blew my mind when I saw them the first time.
Mhm.
Boy State, it's amazing how phenomenal a documentary they can make in such a short amount of time. I mean, they spent
Mhm.
just a week with these boys and made this incredible documentary that basically shows all of the issues with our political system through this tiny little lens of a mock election, of a teenage boy's mock election in Texas, right?
Mhm.
Minding the Gap shows like, basically it's like a lifetime of video that this filmmaker, he collected early and then went back as a filmmaker to keep following some of the same people, and turned it into this great personal documentary it's all about domestic violence, but it's framed through skateboarding and skateboarders. And then The Act of Killing is about, and I'm blanking what country, but um, genocide, and Josh Oppenheimer goes back to this country and basically talks to people who perpetrated the genocide into being actors in a TV show or movie about that genocide, and they're playing
Mhm.
both the killers and the victims, and you see like in their face as they're processing what they did and what happened, and it's just like incredibly creative storytelling, that I hadn't seen before,
Very nice.
but not a fun, uplifting watch at all.
No, I mean, well, not every movie needs to be fun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, there's a meme that I saw going around that was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna watch a feel-good anime movie," and I think they end up watching Grave of the Fireflies, which no.
Right.
The but anyway, so thank you. Yeah, thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, no, this was fun.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have you back in a while. The Where can people find you? Is the
Sure.
third question.
I'm on Instagram at jdavidsburg1 or Lot1 Films. I'm on Twitter at jdavidsburg, and Lot1 Films. And yeah, you can find me all the socials, even Clubhouse. I think I'm still on Clubhouse. So all the socials.
Well, cool. Thank you very much, Josh. This has been the Movie Moolah Podcast. If you like this sort of content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And you should also check out the link below for my free indie film business resource pack, which includes an ebook, a white paper, a festival promotional brochure template, tracking templates, and a whole heck of a lot more. And again, completely free. You'll also get monthly blog and content digests segmented by topic. This one will probably show up there eventually too. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben.